Okay, so I kind of feel like my lecture left out kind of a few examples that might help you. So I'm gonna throw down this quick little video within the lecture. So majority of the stuff I put in the lecture is pretty self-explanatory. Active engagement, obviously, how are you working with the work? What is it that you're doing? How are you, what kind of questions are you asking while you're reading it? Like I gave all those, very specific examples there. Again, evaluation of sources. How are you looking at it? How are you evaluating the source that you have that is valid? And if you've ever taken English 11 class, usually we walk through that. English 2, we kind of do the same thing. Anyway, contextualization, same thing. How are you putting it in context? Synthesis, how are you, how are you layering it? Your thesis is pretty much like the main question you're trying to ask in your paper. Evidence and support, obviously it's research. Like how are you supporting your main points? Counter arguments, here's your argument, here's a counter argument, okay? Clarity and precision, obviously how are you writing to emphasize what you're trying to say? How are you being clear, right? Okay, the things that I want to point out a little bit more and give you some examples of are voice, style, storytelling, imagery, and language, for sure. Okay, when we talk about voice, the voice in the work is the personality, okay? Whenever you read a work, what is the personality that you hear within the work? Is it, is it somewhat sarcastic? Is it, I don't know, let me see here. I'm trying to think of a good example. When we think of Charles Dickens, I know I always keep going back to Charles Dickens, but I love the way he has a very specific voice. You can read a Charles Dickens book and go, oh, that sounds just like Charles Dickens. How do you know? Because of the voice that he uses. It's the same thing with Sherman Alexie. What I love about Sherman Alexie is he has a certain voice. You can almost hear the comedic tick that goes with it. Same thing with David Sedaris. When you read a Toni Morrison, you're going to know because, again, her voice. We'll talk a second in imagery and language, but her voice has something specific to it that when you're reading it, you can feel it. It's the personality within the works, and that's the voice that we talk about when I'm looking for examples. Take a look at some of the readings that I include and tell me what kind of voice do you see in this. We'll get more into this later, but I want you to be in the habit when you are actively engaging in a work. What are you seeing? How are you seeing a voice? What does that look like to you? Style, very similar to voice. Voice is the personality, and then style is like the style, right? The way in which they present their work. I guess so. You have a voice from Charles Dickens, but also you have his style is very just like to the point, says the thing, here we are. That's how you can say Charles Dickens' style is. The reason why voice and style are together is they feel like they kind of bleed together, but when you start to do more of this work, it makes more sense. So if I were to say, oh, what's the voice? You'd be like, oh, I just know a Charles Dickens book based on the voice of it. And the style is going to be very similar to very succinct work. Judy Blume does the same thing. She has that she writes for young adults, and I think that's the reason why most her work reads that way. Summer Sisters isn't so much a young adult book. It's more adultish, but she has that same style, that same voice. You always know a Judy Blume book. Steinbeck. I love Steinbeck because Steinbeck's has this underlying humor throughout, and you're just kind of like, God, Steinbeck. You can read one of his books and you just find yourself laughing. You're like, he's not intended to be comedic. It's just the way his voice and his style is, right? It's very like to the point, and sometimes it's very dry. You'll read something and you're like, did I just read that right? That's Steinbeck for you. Okay. I know that's a little confusing. As we move forward, you're going to see it a lot more as you're reading more works. If you don't do a lot of reading, you might not recognize what that is. I do kind of the bigger books. I don't do genre-y things. A lot of the genre-y things kind of like bleed the same. I guess like Twilight kind of I guess has the same kind of voice and style. I don't know if that's really the best example, but it's a common book. Lots of people have read it. Harry Potter, same thing. I know a lot of you who've read Harry Potter. The second I say that, you hear the voice and you know the style. You're like, oh, it's a Harry Potter book. I know that. You can feel it. Okay. Some people try and emulate someone's voice or emulate someone's style. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I know you know because you've read a lot. A lot of you all have done a lot. If you're in English 4, you've done a ton of reading in your lifetime just to get to this point. So you're going to get it. You're going to feel it. I know those aren't totally specific examples, but you'll get it as you go forward. I hate to say sometimes with literature it's a feeling. I know that's not helping, but that's what we're going with here. Okay, so storytelling and narrative is, again, the reason why these are very similar is they're very similar in the sense of how are you telling the story? How is the story being told? I catch myself very often when I write stories, I'm non-linear. I start in media res, in the middle of. Oftentimes when someone tells a story, that's how you'll know, because they start in the middle of something and it's chaotic and you're like, where are we? And that's maybe an attention grabber. Oh, I wish I could think of someone who does that specifically. What is his name? He did The Shining. Oh my God, I'm embarrassed. Anyway, you know who I'm talking about. When we read certain things, you'll notice the way in which they tell their stories. How are they saying it? When we talk about, like, not necessarily in media res here with Charles Dickens' The Christmas Story, but it's very similar where it's like, in Marley, let me get back to that beginning. I know I keep reading this over and over, and I don't apologize. Screw it. I love Charles Dickens, so we're just going to go with it. Marley was dead to begin with. Like, already we can feel the style, we can hear the voice, and we know that is how the narrative and the storytelling is going to be with Charles Dickens within the story. Let's do the same. You can kind of feel it right from the first sentence and how we know the storytelling is going to go. Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye. Here's the house. It is green and white. It has a red door. It's very pretty. Here is the family. Mother, father, Dick, and Jane live in the green and white house. They are very happy. See Jane? She has a red dress. She wants to play. Okay. All of a sudden, you know exactly as we're reading this. That's not how all of this entire book is, but this narrative is starting from a young girl. That's how the story is being told. It starts that, and then she moves forward through the growth of the child as she experiences a lot of life. You know that old book, See Dick and Jane Run, right? That's what she's starting out with. And that's how her narrative begins, so that you can be placed in the space of what that main character is mentally. That is storytelling, and that is narrative. These are when we're thinking about how we are going to write and read critically. That's what we're talking about. Okay. Oh man, I wish I had done this earlier. Sorry. I forget that I know I'm going to cover more of this as we move forward, and I didn't want to overwhelm you, but now I'm realizing I feel like I kind of wish I'd thrown this in a little bit sooner. It is what it is. We're here. Okay. Imagery and language. We just saw the language. The goal behind what Toni Morrison is doing here is the language she used is incredibly simple. The words she's using is very simple. See Jane run, right? Dick and Jane. To give us a feeling about what we should be expecting from the main character. That's the goal. When we talk about imagery and language, we're trying to create a feeling. What is that feeling? And the reason why I don't go too much into imagery right now, because I'm going to go into it in poetry, because I love it. Imagery is key. When we talk about imagery and we talk about language, Toni Morrison, that first sentence doesn't count because she is wildly she's very lyrical. Her language is very flowery, very beautiful. But she kind of starts us off small because we're in the mind of this child as we move forward. But again, she starts out with the language that is simple so that we can understand the characters. But as we move forward, she uses very, very powerful images. And when we talk about images, we want to think about how is the author walking us through the story with images. I don't know if this is necessarily the way I would. It's like a movie. We're just going to say it's like a movie. If you're watching a movie, in that movie, oftentimes the camera is panning around and looking at things because it's giving you a feeling, and it wants you to see something because it wants you to feel something. In books, it does the same thing. An author will expand the imagery when they want to sit you down and make you feel a thing. And they're going to be very detailed. They're going to be very to the point. They're going to be very specific. They don't just say flowers, they say roses or they say daisies. And every single time I said roses or daisies, each one of those flowers gave you a certain feeling. That is what imagery is. That is what language is. And that is the importance of imagery and language, because that is the essence of the storytelling. So we start out with a voice and a style. We start out with, okay, this is how, I know I'm going to tell the story because this is my personality. And this is kind of how I write. And then we go, well, how am I actually going to tell the story? What's the storytelling going to look like? Again, I'm going to keep using this because it's a little easy. We're going to start out in the storytelling. We're going to start out with a young girl's mind, her experience. It gets really dark. It's a very dark, beautiful book. Okay. But that's the point. She kind of reels you in. It's like, okay, what's going on over here? And you keep going. And then she breaks you open with her imagery and her language and it's wild. So the way Toni Morrison writes, she somehow is incredibly vivid, but without saying the thing. And it's hard to explain how she does it. That is why she is a Pulitzer Prize winning author, because the way in which she is able to manipulate language in a very beautiful, flowery way helps show us exactly what she wants us to see. And without saying it outright, which is hard to explain. I wish I'd have to think of something. Oh, I'm almost afraid to open up the book in one of these pages because she sometimes says stuff. I'm not going to do it yet. We'll get to it. I'll give you more examples later. I think I have the bluest eye actually in when we do short stories. I'll have that link to you for you. Anyway, whole point here that I'm trying to make, long story short, is our goal here is with imagery. We want to understand when we are critically thinking about what we are reading. Think about the type of imagery that you are seeing. Think about the type of language someone is using. Are they writing really big? Is it showing all the things, or is it very simple? Very big. She's very big, and Dickens is very simple, right? That's just kind of the way they are with their images. Sometimes they just get to the point. And maybe it's very abstract. This is what Sherman Alexie will do. He'll talk very, like if ever you've read the Native American stories, I don't think I have them in here, but I've even used them in my other classes, where it's almost like hard to grasp. You're like, what are you kind of saying? You're talking about, I do one where we talk about every little hurricane, and the way in which Sherman Alexie uses the hurricane as the person, but they're talking about a person even though he's saying hurricane. That is a style. That's actually cultural influence too. That's where he gets his writing, obviously Native American writer. So this is the kind of stuff I want you to look at when you're thinking of critical writing and reading. This is what we talk about. We talk about active engagement, okay? The same thing when we talk about structure and form. How are we structuring the way the writings are? Like, structure and form is the finale of how you do it. I lean more into this more when we talk about poetry. And sometimes I don't use a lot of the structure and form books that I have in my grad classes. That's like next level. It is very awesome when you can write a story using stories within the story, and sometimes maybe to tell the story you need to use little snippets of another thing, right? That's structure and form. That's still using form within a form, structure within a structure. And you'll see that I have Buffalo Bills as a link in there. That is a part of form and structure within poetry. I don't have right now as a link for any of my books that show that. It's next level. We'll get there if I think maybe that'll be something we want to cover as we move forward. But right now, structure and form is just kind of just the way in which they want to tell the story. So anyway, all right. So I hope that helped a little bit. I just had to throw that in there. Everything else I talked about, we already know: pre-writing and drafting and, revising and editing and finalizing. All those vocabulary words you already know. The key here is understanding the art of the writing. That's the key. So I hope that helped you a little bit. I I want to give you all the things, but I also don't want to give you too much. But I feel like this was really, really important as I'm looking forward throughout the class. This is the stuff you're going to need. I hope that I will give even more for you let me rephrase that. I will be giving more for you for the other, like when we start doing poetry and short stories. I'm going to break those a little bit more down for you to help you out. The whole point is active engagement within your work. That's what I'm looking for. So I hope that helped. And if you have questions, please message me. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I added more to the notes if you had already looked at it last week. This week, just a couple more little things that are in bold. And that's it. Excited to see it, what you guys come up with. All right.